Now, let's bring in the national editor from The Australian, Dennis Shanahan, because we've seen Scott Morrison deliver a spirited address today on international security with direct emphasis on what decisions China may take, as I've mentioned. Have a look at this.
The crisis that now grips Europe heralds a moment of choice for China, the Chinese government and leadership. Under Mr. Putin, Russia has chosen the path of violence and seeking to overturn the global order. The world has heard China's words about its commitment to global peace and respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity and playing a positive role in the international community for a very long time now. So it's now up to China and their leaders at this hinge point of history to demonstrate that these are more than just words. But I fear the early signs are not good.
Good evening, Dennis. The Prime Minister was direct and he was fairly critical of China today, which I think is a fair reflection, is it not, of the way Beijing has really embraced Russia from the beginning of the year.
Yes, Chris. And look, to be fair to Scott Morrison, he has actually been consistent with his criticism of China, and it goes back quite some time. This is not just something that's popped up because of the invasion of Ukraine. The Prime Minister has been quite critical of China. He's been criticised for it in the past. Remember, and in fact I was there at the speech he gave where he said China shouldn't have developing nation status in the trade world when it was one of the biggest trading economies in the world. Yet he was criticised for that. He's also very strong on the demands that China has made about Australia, the so-called 14 points, which he says are completely unacceptable. He was first to close the border with China during the COVID pandemic, and he was also, again, criticised for calling out China on its lack of transparency as far as the beginning of the pandemic Now, I think this is as one with the Prime Minister's view over the last 2 years at least, and I think that what he's trying to do, without trying to draw undue parallels to China and Taiwan and Russia and Ukraine, what he's actually doing is trying to get China to express criticism of Russia. He's not trying to say, because Russia has gone into Ukraine under all sorts of different pressures and demands, it is not the same as China's claims about Taiwan. And I think he's trying to keep that pressure off the idea that somehow there is a direct equivalence with Taiwan and China and Russia and the Ukraine. So I think that he's been quite strong, he's been consistent, and there's really no choice as far as China is concerned. They are being soft on Russia. They are not condemning their actions, and they have lifted the sanctions on wheat imports from Russia.
They have, and that's what he was referring to today as well. They've got to be seen to be getting on with it politically, Dennis, because, we want to see some action. We don't want to see a weakness, which is what the United States showed leading up to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So he's named 3 places where we're going to build this $10 billion submarine base. It is full steam ahead. Peter Dutton sounds like he wants to forward it a little bit faster than what the PM does, but it's important they do this leading up to the election, isn't it?
Look, it is very important that they do it. And look, I was in New York and Washington when Peter Dutton and Scott Morrison were talking to the US and Boris Johnson about the AUKUS agreement and the nuclear submarines. And Peter Dutton has been very keen on trying to get the nuclear submarines in service or something which will stop a capability gap. He first raised the idea of an off-the-shelf leasing arrangement. So he's been very keen as Defence Minister to get things up and running and prevent any sort of a capability gap. Scott Morrison has been a bit slower on the uptake, but his speech today was quite emphatic. And of course, he said that the basing of a submarine port on the East Coast would not supplant the submarine base on the West Coast. So this is an additional submarine port in either Brisbane, Port Kembla or Newcastle. Now, of course, he's been accused of playing politics and looking at marginal seats and so on. But I think that it is pretty clear that the $10 billion isn't all just going to one single port on the East Coast. It includes help in South Australia and an upgrading of the port in Western Australia. And I think it's important here that we see that the strategic demands of Australia are not corrupted in any way by the idea that, we need to provide jobs in Adelaide or Perth or Newcastle or Port Kembla or Brisbane. We have to make the decision based on the best strategy for Australia of where this submarine port should be. And we've seen too many decisions in the past made on the basis of it's jobs for Adelaide. Yeah. It can't happen again.
No. On the energy front, Dennis, tech billionaire Mike Cannon-Brookes and Brookfield have pulled the plug on their second attempt to buy out AGL. And Manufacturing Australia has released a report today saying shifting away from fossil fuels will only inflate energy costs. And so the transition will need more time and more money, they say. What do you make of that?
Well, look, this is really, it amazes me. A few years ago, gas was seen as the transition fuel. It was the fuel that would reduce carbon emissions while we moved into a carbon-free economy. Now, that's a perfectly reasonable assumption. But what happened was the success of the various environmental groups campaigning against coal made them think that they could immediately overleap gas, that gas was no longer required as a transition and we could just go straight to renewable energies providing main core power. Well, that's not going to happen. And I think that we've seen perhaps a financial judgment here that, yes, all of a sudden we've been told for quite some time now, renewables are cheaper. Yeah, renewables are cheaper. We can close down the gas and coal because renewables are cheaper. Well, this is a multi-billion-dollar evidence that renewables are not cheaper in the supply of mainstream power. And I think we're seeing the reality address the dollars in the finance world today.
So true. We've got to hold our horses. We've got to be patient if a transition is to come. You're exactly right. Dennis Shanahan, thank you so much for your time.